May the force be with you.
This is going to be a physical SEC football game, and that's what it was. But just so happy for our fans and so happy for our players.
On the muff punt, obviously a really close call that was overturned. I mean, what was said to you?
I don't know. I mean, it's that he touched it.
We did not come here to lose by 7. We came here to win the game, and I think you could see that by the way that we played. We just ran into a team that was 7 points better than us tonight, and it'd be hard to look at the Arkansas Razorbacks and not be proud of the effort and the resiliency that we showed tonight and the physicality.
I think he's gotten better and better. Here's a bug. He's had the ability to do it in practice.
Oh, welcome in the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Mike Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter. And look who decided to show up. Cousin Shane, a Tennessee homer. What are you up to, brother?
Boy, we're mixing things up today, huh? Been so long, we forgot the intro. Hey, buddy, what's going on?
Oh, man, we've been busy over here doing interviews left and right. We got 2 more for the show. We got Nathan King from Auburn Undercover going to go on a deep dive here. All the news and revelations there on the plane, so looking forward to that. We got Stephen Lassan of Athlon Sports. He's going to give us insight into every single SEC bowl opponent. And, man, just getting geared up and ready for Christmas. How about you, brother?
Oh, my gosh. Ain't that the truth, man? It's just, I saw a meme the other day, and it said, we went from December 1st to December 21st in 2 days. And I swear, man, that's what it feels like, man. It feels like we are in the fast lane at warp speed, and Christmas is almost here. Clearly not ready, man. I got Amazon coming to my house every day. I got the UPS. I like that I can tell if it's a UPS truck or FedEx truck just by listening, Mike. That's just how many people are coming to my house. I'm watching my bank account just go down, down, down. I need to make some money off my gambling here. So, but hey, I'll tell you, it's bowl season. I absolutely freaking love it. I'm watching teams I would never care about. You know what I'm saying? Yep. And it's just it's fantastic. Putting money on teams. I put one on. I was like, man, I like these guys' jerseys. Or I'll see the running back. I'll be like, golly, this kid can run. Why is he not in the SEC? So that's how I'm making my picks right now, and it seems to be working. So, but other than that, Mike, I'm doing well. How about you and yours?
Oh man, we're doing well here. I got your brother, the Flying Hawaiian, in town, so needless to say, I've had a couple drinks. Hopefully we can manage to get through this, but thankfully recorded those interviews before the brews started going. And, man, you talk about bowl season. We got some SEC action here. It kicks off on Wednesday with the Armed Forces Bowl, Missouri and Army. We're going to get to those picks in just a moment, but we got to get to our interviews first. And let's just start off here, Shane, with Nathan King of Auburn Undercover. Like I said, so much going on there on the plains. Bo Nix has already left to Oregon. Tank Bigsby, we thought he was going to leave. Now he's there. Change at offensive coordinator. Signing day. I mean, so much news and notes. We tackled all of that with Nathan King. So let's kick it over to our interview. A really outstanding job here by Nathan. All right, we're pleased to once again be joined by Nathan King, who does an outstanding job covering the Auburn Tigers for 24/7 Sports. He's the host of the Auburn Undercover podcast, my go-to podcast to get all the info on the Auburn sports programs. And you got to give him a follow at Nathan King 247. Nathan, thanks again for joining the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate y'all having me on. Merry Christmas.
Yeah, same to you, brother. And man, this is a perfect time to get you on because it just seems like every couple of days here there's a bomb dropped there with the Auburn Tigers football program. And I think obviously the biggest one, Bo Nix decision to leave the program. And of course we know now he's going up to Oregon, going to follow Kenny Dillingham up there, who was just named offensive coordinator. And just wanted to get your thoughts on that. And, such a legacy player there for Auburn. What do you think made him make that decision to leave? Was it, not wanting to play for his fourth offensive coordinator in 4 years? Was it maybe he didn't want to play for Brian Harsin? What's your read on that situation?
Yeah, it's funny. Everyone was saying, well, he's going to play for 4 offensive coordinators regardless of where he goes. And Sykes ended up being one of the only possible situations he could have done where that's not the case. I mean, I think the injury changed the trajectory of Bo's career path just a little bit, because I think he might have had designs on, possibly entering the NFL draft. I know that sounds, to some people, that sounds a little silly, I think. But I was told he got a 6th-round grade coming out this year. And if you look at kind of the progression of his career, as you know, he had the best season at Auburn this year. And he's got a lot of talent. He's got a lot of upside. It's just never been cohesively and consistently honed in one particular season even over the stretch of a few games. He's never really been able to do it very consistently. And so, it just came down to a fit for a final season because Bo Nix made it very apparent. Look, he was transparent about things after the season ended, saying, I need to do what's better for me. And that's kind of when the transfer talk started, because people were realizing he's not being committal about this. He had multiple opportunities to say, nope, I'm coming back to Auburn. I can't see myself anywhere else. I'm going to play one last year at Auburn. I mean, that would have been the easy answer. He had multiple opportunities to do that, and all of a sudden, multiple times he was saying, different interviews and radio, all that kind of stuff, that he's keeping all his options on the table. He needs to figure out what's best for his future. And ultimately, what that came down to is this is just going to be a one-season kind of vacuum for Bo Nix, his senior year, his 4th season as a college player, where all he's trying to do is raise his draft stock. Obviously, he wants to go to a program that he likes, and it makes sense because he was really close to Kenny Dillingham when he was here for a year at Auburn. But yeah, he just wants to make it to the league. This is easily going to be, he has said this is going to be his final college season. He's engaged. He's going to be married next year. So, he's ready to be done with college, but he did not think that Auburn was going to be the place for him to raise his NFL draft stock. And there's decent reasons why he would be valid in thinking that. You look at this offensive line turnover, they might lose 6 guys with starting experience on the offensive line. And then the wide receiving core it came along over the course of the season, but when Bo was healthy and when it was kind of the middle of the year, the meat of the SEC schedule, they dealt with a lot of issues in the receiving core. So it's a move that, in hindsight, I think makes a lot more sense now. And the glass half full Auburn fans will say that it's best for both sides because, I think a lot of people have kind of grown, had some Bo Nix fatigue. He obviously did a lot of good things, but, there was always kind of that feeling that maybe he was holding Auburn's offense back, but at certain points. But this is going to be really important to see what Brian Harsin does moving forward, because not only is this quarterback battle, however he handles this, it's going to be important for the success of next season. But I kind of think it hinges, Brian Harsin's tenure at Auburn sort of hinges on this. If they botch this and their quarterback play isn't very good, they could very well have a losing season next year. And obviously that might not bode well for Brian Harsin's future.
Yeah. So do you anticipate Auburn exploring the transfer portal to get a veteran in there that, I'm not moving on Tank Finley. I know they got a freshman Davis they really like, but you got to have options in the SEC. So do you think Auburn will add a transfer quarterback?
I do. Yeah. They've already been poking around a little bit. The 2 guys they've been in contact the most with are the one that everybody wants, and that's Cameron Ward from Incarnate Word. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it seems like, Ole Miss might be in play for him. He was just a phenomenal quarterback on the FCS level. Everyone's been, vying for his talents to come to their program. And then Keaton Slovis, obviously, was another big name that Auburn's been in contact with. Obviously, right now, it seems like he might be more of a West Coast lean, might go back to a place like Arizona, where he's from. He's from the Phoenix area. And so, that leads you to believe, when you look at their involvement in the portal so far, it leads you to believe that that's the frame of mind for Brian Harsin and this offensive staff right now is, okay, we like the quarterbacks we have. Certainly Auburn's starting quarterback next year could be on the roster. They've got 3 scholarship guys that are all talented in their own way, and I think could all be developed in their own way into good players. But I really just, looking ahead, I see this as being a 4-man quarterback battle, at least in the spring, because later on it can be knocked down and you can whittle out the candidates a little bit. But I think when spring practice starts, assuming they can get somebody before spring, because they didn't get TJ Finley until the middle of June, and so it could be just a guy coming in for fall camp. But Finley was just a good backup. That's why they added him, and they figured with his experience he could just come in and be a good backup, and he was exactly that. He was kind of exactly what they needed him to be. It might be a situation now where they're trying to get a guy in for spring so that they can have that four-man quarterback battle.
Now, there was a speculation that Tank Bigsby was going to leave as well, but I believe Auburn Undercover was the first to report that he was going to stay at Auburn, and I believe it was a meeting with the coaching staff. Can you provide any insight into what went in there and how that Auburn got Tank Bigsby to stay? Because I got to imagine, had he put his name in the portal, every program in the country would have called him. I mean, he's that good of a player. So, I mean, that was a huge news for Auburn's football program.
Yeah, and this was kind of, really the last 3 weeks or so were sort of a master class in showing everybody, hey, things change at the college level. And sometimes they change really fast when you're dealing with 20-year-old kids because obviously, people jump to a lot of conclusions about Bo Nix, whether he was going to be staying or leaving. That was a situation that was going to be in flux, and it was in flux. There was a point in which Bo Nix, it seemed like he was heavily leaning toward staying, and then obviously it went the other way. Conversely, on the other end of the spectrum, it was the same with Tank Bigsby. There was a span about a 36-hour period where it really seemed like he and his mom had a meeting with the coaching staff. It really seemed like he had one foot out the door, and then there was a day, I guess it was like a week and a half ago now, where there was a meeting set up with Brian Harsin and some of the staff and some of the coaching staff. And the purpose of the meeting was to try to convince him to stay, and it worked. It doesn't work out super often. Maybe that's kind of now you look in hindsight, maybe he wasn't leaning toward leaving as much as some people thought and kind of as much as was implied. But yeah, that's easily the biggest recruiting win for Brian Harsin in his time at Auburn, getting a guy like that, especially with the Bo Nix situation. Because that's a night. If Tank leaves too, that's a nightmare. You have your two offensive MVPs by a significant margin. And Tank Bigsby had he only had 200-yard games in SEC play, so his role didn't diminish. His production kind of diminished as a sophomore. We'll see how they're able to fix the run blocking next season. But yeah, that would have been a massive, massive blow. I'm really not sure how this offense would have rebounded from that. But now you've got a guy in Tank Bigsby where you're saying, it's very possible next year's his last season because it'll be his junior year. He'll probably try to turn pro and see what he can do in the NFL. And so he'll be the workhorse next year. He will be the focal point of this offense, regardless of who they bring in at quarterback. It's going to be Auburn's first, new starting quarterbacks in 3 years. And so, they'll certainly lean on Tank Bigsby, and they're probably going to need him because, like we said, they're going to be breaking in a new offensive line, and the receiving core still kind of got some question marks, and then a new quarterback. So certainly Tank Bigsby should have an opportunity next year to get over 1,000 yards again.
Mm-hmm. And last week was so huge for Auburn on the recruiting trail. I believe heading into maybe a week prior to the early signing period, Auburn was sitting at 12th in the SEC in the recruiting ranks according to 24/7 Sports Composite. Now, after an incredible close here, they're sitting at number 6 in the SEC, number 13 nationally. How impressed were you with Auburn's ability to close on so many key targets and get so many decisions to go their way during the early signing period?
Well, I think that there were two takeaways for me. Number one, when you have a class like this, and this is why a lot of people who follow recruiting very closely were nervous about how this was going to shake out for Auburn at the end, because you don't want to put all your cards on the table for the very end. You don't want to bank on it and say, we'll land all these guys we want to land and we'll be right where we need to be. It often doesn't happen that way. A lot of there's flips. There's guys that end up signing later, which Auburn's got a 4-star defensive lineman, Caden Story, which he's not going to sign until February, and so it looks like he's going to be taking some official visits other places, so they might have to kind of re-recruit him. But other than that, they landed every single recruit they needed to land over the past week. And even the second takeaway is, even though they missed out on two guys they thought they could have, Curtis Perry, the 4-star defensive lineman from just a couple hours down the road, and Darius Clemens, the 4-star receiver from Oregon. They missed out on both of those guys. Those guys were, at one point, Auburn was their number one, and it really looked like they were coming to Auburn. If they get both those guys, they're probably a top 10 class. But the fact they were able to jump into the top 15, even without a couple of their targets that went, Darius Clemens went to Michigan, and Curtis Perry ended up choosing Alabama, which kind of was expected down the stretch. They get a big flip with Robert Woodyard, who, because of what they're losing in the linebacking core, they might lose their top 3 linebackers. He's the highest rated player in their class now, and he'll probably have an opportunity to play as a true freshman. They almost cleaned house on the defensive side of the ball from the JUCO ranks. They got the number 1 JUCO defensive tackle, number 1 JUCO corner, and number 1 JUCO safety. So they're going to be able to reload that defense pretty nicely next season. Yeah, it was impressive. I mean, a lot of people had their doubts about how the staff was recruiting and kind of their recruiting plan. But as Keith said last week on our podcast, you brought up a good point, that it seems like they're kind of figuring it out. And you come into the SEC with a staff that's not familiar with this territory, and it's obviously, not very cohesive. A lot of them hadn't done this before as a group. Obviously, you had some of the Boise guys, but their ideals are different than the SEC ideals. Seems like everybody's sort of coming together at Auburn and sort of figuring this thing out. Zach Etheridge, the cornerbacks coach, had a phenomenal week. He was key in securing those guys. Derek Mason was a really big recruiter for them. I think if they can hold on to this, that needs to be their objective. If they can hold on to a top 15 ranking, that's huge. I mean, that's really, really big, and that puts this program in a good position to stay afloat in the SEC, which is when you're in this conference, that's all you can really ask for.
Mm-hmm. And I know we already hit on potentially adding a quarterback via the transfer portal, but now that we have the early signing period come and gone, is there another position group aside from quarterbacks that you really think Auburn will attack either via National Signing Day or the transfer portal to shore up some issues?
Offensive line. That is the one red flag right now. And Brian Harsin, in not as many words, sort of said as much. The state they're in right now is kind of unacceptable for this recruiting class moving forward. They lost to Drew Bobo, who's a 3-star center from right down the road at Auburn High. Not surprising, obviously. His dad got shown the door. His dad is obviously Mike Bobo, and he, unsurprisingly, went to Georgia. Drew Bobo did, where his dad went to school and coached for a long time, and so that made a lot of sense. The only offensive lineman they have on board for this class, committed or signed, is Eston Harris, who is a big tackle prospect, also from Auburn High School. But he's a 3-star. He's kind of a raw player that they're hoping to be able to develop over the course of the next few years. That's not going to cut it for this class, and so there are a couple guys they're looking at. I would not be surprised if they get 3 or 4 offensive linemen to come in either at the recruiting ranks. Probably maybe you get 1 or 2 there, and then in the transfer portal you get 1 or 2 there. They've already been doing that. The name of the FIU offensive tackle, his name escapes me. There's also a Virginia offensive tackle in the portal. His name escapes me as well. But they were in with those guys. Obviously, the FIU transfer didn't work out, and they've been very heavy looking at offensive line recruits because, like we talked about, they could be in a situation where not only they lose those 6 guys with starting experience, which Auburn's offensive line had its issues, and so sometimes just because people have starting experience doesn't mean that's a good thing. But you don't want to completely start from scratch. You don't think that's necessarily a good situation. They have a couple returning pieces, but really other than 2 guys at both tackle spots who had some starting experience in the past, and their starting right guard returning, pretty much nobody else on the roster has any experience in SEC play at all. And so you feel like you've got to go get a couple guys like Brandon Council a couple years ago, who started at guard for them for 2 years. He was a really big pickup from Akron. Mm-hmm. You don't have to go to a big school. You just got to land somebody that you feel like can come in and fill a gap for a little bit. So that is going to be, all eyes are going to be on the offensive line, because even though their ranking is really good right now and they're getting all these flashy players, they added 6 blue chip prospects in the last week. That's all good and dandy, but if Auburn can't figure out its offensive line, which has unquestionably been its biggest issue the last 3 seasons, they're not going to get very far on offense. And no matter who's playing quarterback, they're probably not going to be very successful.
Man, all these issues. I hope they nailed this offensive coordinator hires. What can you tell us about Austin Davis? Of course, now it's official, former quarterback coach for the Seattle Seahawks. How do you see him fitting in there with Brian Harsin's coaching staff?
Well, I think kind of just reading the language and the context that Brian Harsin talked about last week. We talked to him in Birmingham for a bowl game press conference, but the hire had not been made official yet, so he kind of just talked about the vacancy in general. And then we talked to TJ Finley the next day, and this is the hire that makes a lot of sense for what Brian Harsin is trying to do right now. All signs are pointing toward Harsin calling plays for this offense next season, which obviously he's done in the past. He's a play caller, coordinator, quarterbacks coach at Boise State. He did the same at Texas, and so it makes a lot of sense given the state of things last year with Mike Bobo. He sort of started putting his hand deeper into the offense over the course of the season and kind of taking over and kind of running things his way. And so it'll be interesting to see how different that looks next season. But, there is going to be an offensive coordinator tag on Austin Davis. But really what he's going to be is he's the guy that's a designated quarterbacks coach. Brian Harsin said one of the most important things about this hire was getting somebody that can not only develop the quarterback position, but can recruit the quarterback position. And you're talking about a guy, I know that he doesn't have much college experience, but you're talking about a guy that's worked with Russell Wilson and kind of has that cachet to him whenever he's able to pitch to recruits. And so he's also from the South. He's from Mississippi. He's got ties there from his time with Southern Miss. And so I really don't think that's that big of an issue. Auburn's defensive line coach, Nick Eason, coached in the NFL. He was an NFL guy, and he's had no problem coming in and making an impact on the recruiting trail. And so it'll be three guys kind of putting their heads together. Obviously, Harsin will probably have the most influence on the offense, and then Austin Davis, who's now the OC and quarterbacks coach, and Eric Keesaw, we'll see if he maybe adds like a passing game coordinator role in the future, maybe a co-OC kind of tag to him, but he's the receivers coach right now. He was Harsin's OC for 3 years at Boise State, and that's somebody that Brian Harsin talked about last week as, I've got a lot of experience with him. He and I, know each other. We know how we like to run offenses together. So sounds like, yes, Austin Davis is the offensive coordinator, and he will have a much bigger opportunity than he had with the Seahawks to be a part of the offensive game plan. At the same time, it'll probably be more of a brain trust situation, three guys kind of putting their heads together to form the offense, and then Brian Harsin will execute things on game day.
All right, last thing for you, Nathan. I really appreciate all your time, but man, it's wild. So we get this transfer news, we get the signing period, we got coaching changes. We still got a bowl game to play. I mean, they jam-pack all this in a couple weeks span. So what can you tell us about how Auburn matches up with number 20 Houston in the Birmingham Bowl, which will be Tuesday, December 28th? And it sounds like Auburn is anticipating quite the crowd, and I guess that makes sense given the fact it's the Birmingham Bowl. But what's your expectations heading into this one?
Yeah, I mean, that's a positive for this kind of a game. I think, Birmingham Bowl really wanted Auburn. I'm not sure if Auburn really wanted the Birmingham Bowl, but it's certainly a fit that makes a lot of sense, and they're going to have a lot of fans there. It's a tough draw for both sides because you're talking about Auburn. You've got to play a team in Houston that won 11 straight games. They're one of the best winning streaks in the country. They've got one of the best defense. I believe they've got a top 10 overall defense in the country, top 10 scoring defense. That made the conference championship game and hung with Cincinnati there for a little bit before losing that game. And then if you're Houston, you're thinking, what's our reward for going 11-1 in the regular season? Is playing a 6-6 SEC team in its own backyard. Mm-hmm. And so I just I'm not sure how I would fix it. I'm not saying I have any answers for it or anything like that. I just thought that was interesting. I don't think it's necessarily a great draw for either side. This is a concerning matchup for Auburn. In terms of how powerful Houston's defense has been this season. I am interested, though, to see how things are offset in this game because you've got so many factors that if you just look at these teams on paper, like week 0 of this year, that this would be a different matchup. There's no Bo Nix for Auburn. When you're talking about Houston, they're going to have their two best defensive players have both opted out. Marcus Jones, who is an All-American cornerback last year, who Zach Etheridge coached. He's opted out of the bowl game. Logan Hall, who led them in tackles for loss, he's their best defensive lineman. I think he's like a second or third round projection. He is also not playing. So those things kind of offset each other, I would think. You go back to Auburn's side. Their two best defensive players are not playing in this game. Zacoby McClain is not playing. Obviously, everybody knows how great he's been. Roger McCreary's going to be a first-round pick at cornerback. He's an All-American. And so the biggest question for me is just how good is this Houston defense? Number one, after facing off against, I believe it looked it up this morning, the 97th toughest schedule in the country. Really after those first couple games and minus matchups, with Cincinnati, they didn't really have very tough competition, and they were kind of able to shut everybody down, beating up on teams like Tulane in the American Conference. But, it'll be interesting to see how good their defense is against an SEC offense. But at the same time, Auburn's got two starting offensive linemen that aren't going to play. Tayshawn Manning's already transferred, and Brodarius Ham is sitting out the bowl game so he can prepare for the NFL draft. And so it'll be interesting to me to see how good Houston's defense actually will be in this game. I think it'll probably be a close game. I really don't see Auburn having the firepower to run away with it. TJ Finley is supposed to be good for this game. He's been going through practices. He's fine after that ankle injury. But he said himself he's not going to be 100%. And so, we'll see how how he's able to move the offense along. Obviously, when he got that injury against Alabama, he really was immobilized. Like, he wasn't able to do anything in the pocket, wasn't able to step in and push the ball downfield like he's used to. And so I think this will be a big defensive matchup. Auburn's defense, though, to me, has enough athletes and enough players, even without their two best players, to be the best unit in this game. And if TJ Finley's able to make a few plays, think big to make a few plays, Auburn is able to win this game. But, yeah, I'm interested to see how good Houston's defense actually is, because on paper it's supposed to be really, really good.
Man, the storylines going into bowl season, it's night and day different than it was years ago. But I guess that's just where we're at, huh?
Yeah, I mean, Brian Harsin said it this week, and it's not something you can sit and complain about. Number one, I mean, in my opinion, you shouldn't complain about it. If these guys want to sit out the Birmingham Bowl to prepare for, a 15-year NFL future, they should definitely do that. But at the same time, it happens to everybody. So it's not like you can complain about it because it's happening all across the country. Houston, that might be their two best players, period, on the entire roster, Marcus Jones and Logan Hall. And I think Roger McCreary is probably the best player on Auburn's roster. And so, again, we'll see how those things sort of set each other off and sort of mitigate each other. And I think this should be a pretty even matchup. I think these teams are pretty evenly matched. And I mean, honestly, I'm excited to see it. It's a pretty good matchup. And I think that's probably a pretty good compliment for the Birmingham Bowl.
All right, well, he's Nathan King. Give him a follow at Nathan King 247. He's the Auburn beat writer for 24/7 Sports. And don't forget to check out the podcast, the Auburn Undercover podcast. Nathan, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
For sure. I appreciate y'all. Y'all have a good holiday week.
All right, so I appreciate Nathan joining the show. Once again, you can give him a follow at Nathan King 247 Sports. And don't forget to check out all the work they're doing over there at auburnundercover.com. Part of the, obviously, the 24/7 Sports Network, and his podcast, the Auburn Undercover Podcast. That's where I get my Auburn news. So really appreciate Nathan joining the show. But hey, like I said, Shay, double whammy here. I mean, my goodness, all the interviews, notes across the SEC, and more importantly, really felt like we had to bring in somebody that was going to bring in some insight to all these teams outside of the SEC. And no one better than my man, Stephen Lassan of Athlon Sports. So let's kick it over to that interview. Well, we're pleased to once again be joined by one of my favorite podcasters, college football insiders. He's Stephen Lassan of Athlon Sports. Got to give him a follow at Athlon Stephen. He writes and edits the college football preview magazine we all know and love. And of course, he's the host of the outstanding Cover 2 podcast for Athlon Sports. Stephen, thanks again for joining us once again. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Mike, it's great to talk to you once again. It's a fun time for college football fans with the bowl season going on. Also a little chaotic with the transfer portal and coach movement. But yeah, I guess there's really no off season anymore for college football.
Yeah, we were joking right before we started recording here. Man, I took a week off. I thought that'd be a perfect time right before Christmas. And man, it was like one mega bomb after another of everything happening. And that's just SEC. So I cannot imagine people like you that cover the entire nation, how busy you are even during this holiday season. So I really do appreciate you hopping on. And like I said, with 13 SEC bowl games, there's no one better than Stephen Lassan to break down some of these opponents that the SEC will be facing this bowl season. And let's just start right there, Stephen, with the first SEC bowl game, the Armed Forces Bowl, Missouri versus Army. And I do not envy, Stephen, you for having to break these down with who knows who's going to be even playing these games. I mean, Eli Drinkwitz just came out here on Tuesday and said Tyler Beatty's not playing. They're going to go with Brady Cook as the starting quarterback. So Connor Bazelak's not going to be playing. So it's impossible to handicap these games, but what can you tell the audience about Army and the season they had?
Yeah, I think what you were getting at there is something important as to keep in mind as you're watching bowl season. Because of the way the transfers and coaching and opt-outs are now, it's really difficult to like make any kind of takeaways from bowl games. Like we should just enjoy them as sort of exhibition games almost. If you want to play Army, you almost want to get them like in the season opener or the bowl game because of what they do. I mean, they run the option. They are very difficult to prepare for. Missouri's had trouble all year stopping the run. They were a little bit better later in the season. But you know when you play Army, it is a low possession game, and you sort of have to maximize every possession that you get because you may only get the ball a couple times in every half. So I think stylistically, you know what they're going to do on offense. They're going to run the option. They've got a handful of guys who carry the ball. Jacoby Buchanan is a big fullback. Tyrell Robinson is a little bit more of a faster player. Christian Anderson, their quarterback, does a lot of the ball carrying too. So you know what you're getting from the offense and from the defense. They're giving up only about 23 points a game. They've been prone to giving up a little bit big plays, but overall they do a good job of once you get kind of in that scoring area, finding ways to get off the field. And of course, without Tyler Beatty now from Missouri, a lot of intrigue for me about what the running back situation looks like, what the quarterbacks look like. So I think for Missouri, it's going to be really crucial to sort of push the tempo and get ahead on the scoreboard because once you fall behind against Army, I mean, they've played Wisconsin this year, they've played Wake Forest. They can be a really difficult opponent in the bowl season.
Yeah, and Steve Wilkes and this Missouri defense, they improved their run defense, but man, like you said, this is going to be the ultimate test of how far they've come on that side of the ball, and they must have been rolling their eyes when they heard they're going to face Army in the bowl game. You know what?
Yeah, it's sort of like it's like I said, it's good that you catch Army in the bowl game if you're going to play them, but it's also one of those matchups that you really don't want to play because the blocking and the way that they run is like once they start get that option going and you third and fourth quarter, if it's in a tight game and you're trying to make a stop, they are very difficult to defend. And it's the same thing that West Virginia fought against them last year in the bowl game of low possessions. And once they got behind, it was tough to keep up. So yeah, I would say Missouri probably was not the matchup they wanted to see in the bowl season.
Now, another game we got this week, Thursday, December 23rd, Florida is going to be facing Central Florida in the Gasparilla Bowl. Anthony Richardson's going to be out. There's been several opt-outs from the Florida Gators. It sounds like it's going to be Emory Jones, who I guess he's going to enter the portal after the game. I've never seen a starting quarterback make the decision to enter the portal after a game he's got upcoming. But hey, this is a little bit of a rivalry down there in the Sunshine State. What can you tell us about Gus Malzahn, his first team down there at UCF?
Yeah, I was going to start by saying, yeah, old friend Gus Malzahn taking on the SEC again. And, you mentioned it there, all Florida. And I think that sort of speaks to, bowl game motivation. Motivation is so important in these games. Like who wants to be there, who wants to show up. I have no doubt in my mind that UCF really wants this game. They're getting a Power Five opponent, in-state opponent, in a bowl game where UCF this year is 8-4, and they've had to navigate a lot of injuries. Dylan Gabriel, their quarterback, got hurt. He transferred to UCLA. They've been banged up at receiver and running back, but still getting to 8-4 was a good season for this UCF team. They have a lot of guys that SEC fans may remember. Brandon Johnson, the Tennessee transfer, is at
Mm-hmm.
receiver. Big Cat Bryant is on defense. He's had 14 tackles for a loss this season, and their defense has been good. 25 points a game given up. Offensively, they're really not that explosive right now in offense. Mikey Keene is a freshman who is starting at quarterback, and he's been solid. But if you look down the stretch, they won 5 out of their last 6 games, and some of those opponents weren't very good. So they're really not right now because of the injuries and quarterback transfer. They're just not as explosive on offense as they were early in the season. So I think for Florida, motivation is key. I actually think Emory Jones playing in this game is pretty important because they won't have Anthony Richardson. And also, too, little hat tip to Greg Knox. He beat getting the win over Florida State was good to get to a bowl game. And then, not to mention, he coached Mississippi State before in a bowl game and led them to a win. So I think if you're Florida, motivation is important, but also with the experience that Knox has and keeping Emory Jones is important with everything that's gone on there.
Mm-hmm. And then next week, man, both these games could be pretty wild here. Tuesday, December 28th, we got number 20 Houston playing Auburn in the Birmingham Bowl. I just spoke to Nathan King of 24/7 Sports, and man, he was basically saying anybody and everybody on Auburn's defense sitting out this game. Of course, Bo Nix has already left. what can you tell us about Houston and how they match up? And Houston's had a couple opt outs too, so it's kind of like the opt out bowl down there in Birmingham.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, Houston is missing Marcus Jones, who is one of the nation's top cornerbacks, return men. So that's good news if you're Auburn. You're not playing, you don't have to throw against a good cornerback and a good special teams guy. This is a really good Houston team. They spent time in the top 25, only losses to Texas Tech and Cincinnati this year. They at one point had an 11-game winning streak. And of course, they're led by Dana Holgerson. SEC fans know kind of how he operates. Certainly, very explosive on offense. Offensively, they're averaging about 37 points a game, so they are explosive once again. And they kind of have a trio on offense. Alton McCaskill is a good freshman running back. Nathaniel Dell at receiver, and Clayton Tune at quarterback. So they're very good on offense. And this is the biggest reason that Houston made the jump to 11 wins this year was their defense. Their defense got a lot better this season. So I think this is a tough opponent for Auburn, considering some of the injury question marks. Is TJ Finley healthy? I think when you kind of look from a matchup perspective, Houston struggled to stop Cincinnati's pass rush in that conference championship game. And if Auburn can get that defensive front going, that might be the one thing that slows down Houston. But this is going to be a tough matchup. Houston's well balanced. They've got good playmakers on offense, and their defense, even without Marcus Jones, should be a pretty good group.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was the Houston defensive coordinator that they just signed to a big contract. So they must really like what he's been doing down there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Doug Belk is the defensive coordinator there and is probably a guy we will see in the future in some defensive coordinator searches. Wouldn't surprise me, especially for SEC radar. But yeah, the defense has improved significantly from last season. And also, too, Clayton Tune at quarterback is made the jump, too. He was hurt early in the season and got healthy, and the offense sort of took off. So if you're Auburn, you're really dealing with two sides of the ball that are pretty good here.
Now, hey, if you want some drama, also on Tuesday, December 28th, Mississippi State, Texas Tech in the Liberty Bowl. We all know the backstory there with Texas Tech firing Mike Leach, still owing him money. He loves to bring that up. So it's going to be wild to see what the Pirate, if he, tries to really pound Texas Tech if they can. And Texas Tech, man, they fired their coach. I think they had a pretty good record and of course, went on to the Liberty Bowl here. So what can you tell us about the season Tech's had that even though they fired their coach, they didn't give in on the season?
Yeah, absolutely. Getting to 6-6 this year for Texas Tech. They fired Matt Wells later in the season, and Sonny Cumby has been the interim coach later in the season. So, just getting to 6 wins was kind of maybe exceeding expectations for Texas Tech. They were right there 4, 5, 6 wins by most people this preseason. But you mentioned it. The storyline in this game is Mike Leach against his former team. Mississippi State is one of the biggest favorites of the bowl season. You can kind of see where this one is headed. But when you're studying Texas Tech, I think you think about offense, you think about the air raid, how productive they've been on that side of the ball. They're good on offense. They're not quite as good as they have been. Donovan Smith took over at quarterback this year. They've had some injuries there, and I think he's probably more of a dual threat than they're used to having at Texas Tech, a little bit more mobile. They still have good skill players, but their defense has been a mess the last couple of years, and they're giving up about 67% completion to opposing quarterbacks. So I think you can see where this one is going. Texas Tech was on the razor's edge of bowl eligibility, interim coach, Mississippi State, very motivated coach, and a high powered offense. I think that's one of the reasons why Mississippi State is a big favorite in this game.
Now, kicking over to Thursday, December 30th, familiar foes here, North Carolina versus South Carolina in the Duke Mayo Bowl. And if no other reason to watch this game, Shane Beamer says if they win, pour the mayo on them. What can you tell? I don't think Mac Brown is saying the same. What can you tell us about the Tar Heels this year?
North Carolina didn't quite meet preseason expectations this year. They had top 10, top 15, preseason expectations by most people. And some of that was they lost a couple players to the NFL, Javante Williams, Michael Carter. They also lost another, some receivers. They just didn't quite get there this year, but they still have Sam Howell, a quarterback. Could be a first round pick in the NFL draft. He chose to play in this game. I think everyone is believing that he will head to the NFL after this game. But to me, he's been carrying this team. I mean, as a passer, but also as a rusher. He has over 800 yards rushing. The line of scrimmage has been a challenge for North Carolina this year. Pass blocking, defensively, they've had issues against the run. So, when you study this matchup, for me, South Carolina needs to contain Sam Howell and they need to test that North Carolina defensive front. So, I think with Howell playing in this game, that's a big kind of check in North Carolina's favor in the Duke's Mayo Bowl. So, yeah, I think if you're South Carolina, winning the line of scrimmage is going to be really important to slowing down the Sam Howell, potentially one of the first quarterbacks off the board next year.
Hmm. And also on Thursday, December 30th, Tennessee playing Purdue in the Music City Bowl in Nashville. Should be a pretty solid crowd for the Tennessee faithful. And I know a couple of Purdue's key players have already opted out. What can you tell us about the Boilermakers?
Absolutely. Yeah. David Bell at receiver and George Karlaftis, the defensive end, have opted out for this game. And those are two huge losses. They are, arguably, when you make a list of Purdue's best players, they were at the top of the list for that team. I think when you just study this matchup, I mean, offense, like that's the thing that jumps out to me because Purdue loves to throw the ball. Aiden O'Connell is their quarterback. They like to use kind of a short mid range. They will take some shots downfield. They're fifth nationally in pass attempts. They don't run it well. Sometimes they don't protect well, but they love to throw it. And that's kind of where it starts on offense. And when you look at their defensive stats, they're giving up about 6 yards of play against teams with a winning record this year. So statistically, their defense has been solid, but it's still prone to giving up yards. So I'm expecting some offense here between these two teams. Tennessee is a small favorite, but I like the matchup for the Volunteers in the Music City Bowl.
All right, now how about Friday, New Year's Eve? Man, we got a loaded schedule here. Wake Forest, number 17, against number 25, Texas A&M in the Gator Bowl, and who knows A&M who they're going to start at quarterback. Looks like it might be a walk-on, might be Haynes King if he's able to go. They've had opt-outs left and right. What can you tell us about Wake Forest, who I believe they've got one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sam Hartman has had a really nice season for Wake Forest. And not to mention, they have two 1,000-yard receivers on the outside. So I think, in terms of styles, Wake Forest would love nothing more than to sort of jump on A&M, score early, make A&M play from behind with the uncertainty at quarterback. Wake Forest defensively, though, is not very good. They've been giving up about 200 rushing yards a game, and their defensive coordinator left for Duke. So if you're A&M, I think imposing your will here and running the ball and try to control the line of scrimmage is the way to go. This has been actually a pretty special season for Wake Forest. I mean, it's just the second time in school history they won double-digit games. They won the division title. So they come into this game. We mentioned motivation. There's a lot of key guys off this Wake Forest team that may not be back next year, and they have a difference maker at quarterback. So with everything swirling around A&M, this will be a tough matchup for them.
Mm. Now, we, of course, got the playoff games. I don't know why in the world they play these on New Year's Eve, but it is what it is. It wrecks all our New Year's plans for us college football addicts. But we got number 4 Cincinnati, number 1 Alabama, of course, in the Cotton Bowl. What can you tell us about the Bearcats finally pushing through and making the college football playoff?
I think the first thing that jumps out to me about Cincinnati is the moment will not be too big for them. Like, they've already beat Notre Dame this year on the road. They played Georgia well last year in the bowl season. They will not be sort of overwhelmed by the matchup. I don't think. When you study this team, there's several key guys who have played a lot of football for the Bearcats. I mean, Desmond Ritter at quarterback, dual threat player, continues to get better as a passer. They sort of have a collection of receivers. Jerome Ford, SEC fans may remember him. He was at Alabama. He's been an
Mm-hmm.
explosive running back for Cincinnati this year. And their pass defense, they've allowed only 10 passing touchdowns all season. Ahmad Gardner on one side, Kobe Bryant on the other. They've been lockdown corners all year, both All Americans. So they have a stout pass defense and they are good at getting pressure. This defense, a lot of veterans. It's right near the top of college football. You add in a dual threat quarterback and Desmond Ritter on the other side. So I think with everything that Cincinnati has been experienced and the veterans they have in this game, I think that gives them a chance to, maybe kind of keep this one close early on. I still like Alabama to win, but I think everything that Cincinnati's been through with all these guys and getting to this point, it wouldn't surprise me if they maybe cover that 13, 14 point spread, but Alabama sort of controls the game from the start.
Well, a lot of what you said about Cincinnati, you highlighted their defense. Do they have anybody that could slow down Will Anderson? And even if maybe that's an unfair question because no one's really been able to slow down Will Anderson this year.
I'm glad you brought that up because if one of the questions about Cincinnati coming into this season was the offensive line. It was the one question that they had when you studied this team with all the veterans they have and the dynamic quarterback. Ritter's mobility helps with that. But the offensive line was one area that coming into the season there was some uncertainty about. Statistically, they've been fine. I also think when you look at their schedule, they haven't really been tested. Notre Dame, Houston were the ones that were able to, put some stress on that offensive line. So to me, I think that the line of scrimmage would not surprise me if Alabama offensively, if Brian Robinson actually has a good game because Tulsa was able to run the ball well against Cincinnati just a few weeks ago. And I think on the defensive side for Alabama, Anderson and those pass rushers, I think they can have some success against the Cincinnati offensive line. That's one area where G5, Power 5, matching up in the trenches is always a concern.
Hmm. Now, the other playoff mashup, of course, Georgia against Michigan in the Orange Bowl. Should be one heck of a contest. What can you tell us about Jim Harbaugh's red hot Michigan Wolverine team?
I think this game, a lot of it is a line of scrimmage battle. You look at what Michigan has been able to do offensively with running the ball this season. Cade McNamara, the quarterback, has been really solid. They don't, I think when you study what happened in the SEC championship game, Bryce Young and those receivers were able to take advantage of Georgia's secondary. Like, if Michigan wants to win this game, they're going to have to be able to do that. They have playmakers. They've, Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, Eric All at tight end. You add in the running backs that they have and JJ McCarthy, their second quarterback. Like, they have some playmakers. I just don't know they're going to be able to make enough plays in the passing game. But on the defensive side of the ball, Aiden Hutchinson, David Ajabo, they've combined for 25 sacks. They are going to cause some havoc in this playoff game. And a big reason that Michigan went from, you know, kind of preseason fringe top 25 team to this point was both sides of the ball have taken a big step forward. They changed defensive coordinators from last year. They're mixing a lot of things up on defense and they're winning the battle at the line of scrimmage. So it is going to be interesting to see how Michigan matches up against Georgia in the trenches. And then off of that, what can Michigan do offensively? Because Cade McNamara has been solid, but he will have to make a lot of plays in the passing game, I think, to win in the Orange Bowl.
Now, the $1 million question down there in Athens, I got to ask you as well. Who would you start at quarterback for Georgia, assuming that JT Daniels is healthy, which, according to all my information, is he's healthy. He didn't necessarily look it. Last time we saw him on the field against Missouri, he looked a little rusty. But, who would you start there if you were Kirby Smart?
Oh man, that's definitely the $1 million question. I think I'll say this about Stetson Bennett. I did not think that he was the sole reason they lost the SEC championship game. The pass defense, the line of scrimmage, Georgia could clean some of that up. And he made some big mistakes, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
That cannot happen if Georgia wants to win the national championship. I actually think I would start Bennett in this game. And I think one of the reasons why is what we were talking about with the pass rush of Michigan. I think you're going to need someone who can move around because Hutchinson and Ajabo will make some plays in this game. Georgia's offensive line has been solid this year, but those two pass rushers will create havoc on anyone. So having someone who is mobile, I think could be an advantage for Georgia in this game.
And what's the likelihood, if you could give it maybe a percentage point, that we see Alabama and Georgia in the national championship game? Where would you put that number?
I think pretty high. That's the matchup that I like. I think, if I had to put a lot of confidence, I feel I feel a lot more confident about Alabama winning, but I have Georgia very
Mhm.
high in my very bad confidence picks for the bowl games for beating Michigan. It is interesting if you look down the road a little bit, and we'll have to see what happens in these games, but seeing Georgia as a slight favorite against Alabama is really intriguing because I think too many people just tossed in the towel on Georgia after losing to Alabama. They've been very good all year, and dominant is probably the best way to word it. So I will be
Mhm.
interested to see how those two teams look in the playoff games, and then see what that means for the national championship. Because it would not surprise me if the result flips from the SEC championship game.
Now, moving to New Year's Day, we got Penn State and Arkansas in the Outback Bowl. What I know that Penn State already lost their defensive coordinator, but they've hired Manny Diaz. What can you tell us about Penn State?
Yeah, the first thing about Penn State is offensively, they really don't protect all that well and they don't run it all that well. It's Sean Clifford and their receivers have had to kind of shoulder the load on offense this year. They finished 7-5, but they had a lot of close losses. You think back to the game against Iowa where Sean Clifford was hurt. They played Ohio State well. So, this is a good Penn State team that's a little too one dimensional on offense right now. And defensively, you mentioned it. They won't have coordinator Brent Pry. He's off to be the head coach at Virginia Tech. They're also missing two starters at linebacker, and they're really thin on the defensive line this year. They've had some injuries. They came into the year needing some transfers to step up, and they did, but they're still pretty thin in the defensive line and linebacker group. So I think the thing to me when you study the matchup is, can Arkansas win the line of scrimmage, get some pressure on Sean Clifford? And on the flip side of things, there's no Traylon Burks, but Arkansas still has KJ Jefferson. And with that thin Penn State front seven, that could be a good matchup for Jefferson and Arkansas on January
Mhm.
1st.
Now, how about the Citrus Bowl? Number 15 Iowa versus number 22 Kentucky. Well, what can you tell us about Iowa aside from the fact that last time they saw the field, they could barely score?
Yeah, that's the thing with Iowa is they love to play defense. They love to run the ball. They're not afraid to punt, and they will play the field position game. They are plus 14 in turnover margin this year, and Kentucky is minus 13. So that's a real problem for Kentucky. I think that's the storyline when you play Iowa is they're not going to generate a lot of explosive plays on offense. They're content to play to their defense. They're content to try to force some turnovers. If you're Kentucky, get them out of that. You want to score early. If you don't turn the ball over, make them piece together long drives, which they struggle to do, is the best way to win this game. Also, Iowa will not have Tyler Goodson, who is their best offensive weapon at running back. Iowa does have the best center in college football, Tyler Linderbaum, but the rest of the offensive line has not been very good this year. So this is a game where if Kentucky doesn't beat itself with all the weapons with Wandell Robinson and Rodriguez and Levis, I like their chances in this game just simply because Iowa just is not able to piece together enough offensive drives this year, even though the defense for Iowa is very good and will keep them in this game.
Yeah, and the only thing I can add about Iowa, they just put out a fullback hype video that is incredible. It's the most incredible hype video I've ever seen for a fullback. So they got that going for them.
Yeah, we need more fullbacks with neck rolls, and like we don't have that. We used to have that like in the '90s, some good fullback neck rolls, man.
Absolutely. Well, what should be one of the best games of all bowl season? This, aside from the playoff games, this is probably the one I'm looking forward to the most. The Sugar Bowl, number 7 Baylor, number 8 Ole Miss. I know Dave Aranda's down there doing his thing. They just won the Big 12. What can you tell us about the Baylor Bears?
Much improved from last season. And you can kind of point to two areas why this team is better. The first is the line of scrimmage. The offensive line has improved under new offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes. If the name Jeff Grimes sounds familiar, he spent some time in the SEC as an offensive line coach. He was also BYU's offensive coordinator when Zach Wilson had the big year in 2020. So he came to Baylor. The offense improved a lot, especially at the line of scrimmage and with the run. Also, the quarterbacks, Gary Bohannon and Blake Shapen, have been solid this year. Bohannon was dealing with an injury late in the season. Maybe he's healthy by this game. It's not real clear to me who will start here for Baylor, but that's the story on Baylor's offense. The line of scrimmage is better. They're running the ball better. They're getting more efficiency at quarterback, and their defense under Dave Aranda has been outstanding this year. It took a big step forward from last season. So this is a much improved team, and a much improved team because of what's happened on both sides of the ball, being better in the trenches. And it's a big reason why they won the Big 12 championship game. And I think that's kind of the story when you study the matchup is if you want to slow down Ole Miss, you got to be able to run the ball, and you got to be able to keep Matt Corral off the field, and you got to be able to get some pressure on him. So I think Baylor will be motivated because of everything that's gone on. A lot of key seniors, and Ole Miss will be too because Corral's playing. So I'm with you. Like, there's a lot of intrigue here for me in a very high level bowl game here.
Is there a better coaching matchup you think in all of bowl season here? Dave Aranda's defensive mind versus Lane Kiffin and his play calling ability. That's for that reason alone's got me excited about this one.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That would rank very high on my list. I mean, just seeing what Matt Corral can do against this defense, and it's been a defense that's been rock solid all year. I know there's been a lot that happened at Oklahoma during the regular season, but if you go back and watch what Baylor did to Oklahoma earlier this year, a high-powered offense. I mean, they put the clamps on Oklahoma. So yeah, I mean, just seeing what Baylor is going to be able to come up with Aranda and having an extra couple weeks to prepare against Matt Corral, this should be a fun matchup.
All right, last one, Stephen. LSU versus Kansas State in the Texas Bowl. This definitely, this one is last in my book here. LSU's got an interim coach, interim players all across the board. What can you tell us about Kansas State?
I think the first thing that jumps out to me about Kansas State is just rock solid. They are rock solid on both sides of the ball. Maybe not the most explosive offense, but they're almost like Iowa in the sense that they are not going to beat themselves. They're not going to make a bunch of mistakes. Offensively, Skylar Thompson is their senior quarterback. Not prolific, but executes that offense well. He's also plays a lot in terms of their running game. The key player to watch on Kansas State is Deuce Vaughn. He's a 5'6" running back. He is so fun to watch. He's one of the nation's top all-purpose running backs. He will probably give LSU's defense a lot of trouble because he's done that to everybody this year. He's just fun to watch. And on defense for Kansas State too, just giving up just around 20 points a game. All their losses this year, for the most part, have been really close. So Kansas State's solid in the trenches, just kind of rock solid all around, and they have a dynamic running back in Deuce Vaughn who plays well with Skylar Thompson. That's kind of the heart of Kansas State's offense. Those two are really the two playmakers for the Wildcats.
Wow, Stephen, I mean, incredible insight all across college football. That's why I like to call you the encyclopedia of college football knowledge and, man, hitting on all these teams. So I highly recommend everybody give Stephen a follow at Athlon Stephen on Twitter. And, of course, don't forget to check out all his work at athlonsports.com and the Cover 2 podcast. He does an outstanding job with Braden Gall on that show. So that's a must listen for me. So, Stephen, I really appreciate all your time breaking down a record 13 SEC Bowl opponents here.
Hey, Mike, anytime. Always glad to come on the show. It was good to catch up and talk some bowl games, man. Enjoy the bowl games this season.
Yeah, absolutely. You too, my friend, and hope to talk to you soon.
Absolutely.
Just want to say thanks again to Stephen joining the show. He's been on the show a number of times this season. One of the best out there. Got to follow his work at Athlon Stephen on Twitter. And don't forget to check out the Cover 2 podcast. He's been doing for years and years and years for Athlon Sports. Does a tremendous job. I like to call him the encyclopedia of college football knowledge. He knows about every team in and out. So really appreciate.
He's like he's like the opposite of Shane, you know.
And that's all we're looking for, man. A little bit of Shane, a little bit of Steven. You get everything covered here. You know what?
Absolutely. This is what you're here for, you know? It's just a hodgepodge of news and information.
But hey, like I said in the intro, Shay, we got us a football game to break down, and it's the Armed Forces Bowl. Missouri against, who are they playing here? Army. I almost said
Army.
Navy for a second here. They're Army, Navy. I don't know the difference, do you? But anyway, I do know that Army favored by 6.5 points. The game kicks off at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central on ESPN. And the over-under is 54.5 points. Now, Shane, here's where things get tricky here. Picking these bowl games is tough enough, but you got all 4 of your permanent captains out for the game. Mm-hmm. Tyler Beatty, All-American running back, he's out. Connor Bazelak, your starting quarterback, he's out. Case Cook, your best offensive lineman, he's out. Martez Manuel, your leading tackler, and one of your team captains there in the secondary, he's out. Now we got Brady Cook starting at quarterback for Missouri. Here's his career number, Shane, 24 of 30. Oh, he's accurate, but for only 175 yards, 2 touchdowns. And the only games he's played this year, Southeast Missouri. He played against Georgia, South Carolina, and Arkansas. So having said all that, good luck picking the game, Shane. Who you got in the Armed Forces Bowl, Missouri or Army?
Well, I'll tell you, Mike, the thing about Army is I got a soft spot for these guys, all right? I went to school with a couple of buddies that went up there and played. I thought that was a pretty big deal. And, when you're from a small school and some of your pals go to these universities, you kind of take some of these schools in. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. I pulled for Army because of these guys. I'll never forget one of them, David, if you're out there listening. Back when I played, there was no such thing as concussions, You come up dizzy, the coach just calls it, what do you call it, like a ringer or something like that, or, you just got popped in your ear hole, that's it, you'll be fine, dust off, and for 2 or 3 plays, you have no idea what world you're in. Well, I'll never forget the first concussion I got was from this guy that played at Army, man. I was coming through, we were in practice, and all of a sudden, the snap goes, the running back sitting there, I'm like, this is too perfect, Like, nobody blocked me, and about that time, pulling guard, here he is, knocked the shit out of me. I'm laying on the grass, the coach is yelling at me, telling me to get back in the huddle. But I'll never forget the day he let me out. But hey, kudos to those guys. I love Army, I love Navy, I love Air Force, I love all these guys. Appreciate everything they do for our country, so Army is not a pushover, Mike. There's a reason they're in a bowl game. There's a reason Tennessee dodged them at the start of the season. You don't want to play a team like Army, and especially because you think about what are they good at, Mike? When you think of Army, what do you think of? I think of running the ball. I don't know about you, but you should, because they're very damn efficient at it. And then here on the flip side of the coin, you got Mizzou. Now, I will granted say that later in the season, the defense has tightened up a little bit, especially against the running game. But when you're playing a team that's all they do, it is so tough to defend. Now, there is an added benefit. They had a week advantage. They got a week to watch Army play against Navy. They got some more time to get film in. So, maybe this defense is going to be right. But, the thing that I hate, Mike, is the thing you led off with. Who's not here? The guys that got us to this bowl game. You know what I'm saying? You got a tackle that's going to be a first rounder. You got the Beatty, which is the heart and soul of this offense. I don't think Bazelak is going to kill you, but it is a good picture, a good preview of next season. When you look at this game, I think if you're a Mizzou fan, you're tuning in not for the results. I think you're tuning in to see what your team's going to look like in the future. So, and I'm pretty excited. I'm telling you, I'm watching this recruiting class come together. I think the future's bright for Mizzou. The problem is, Mike, it's not bright for this bowl game. I tried many, many ways to fabricate, to get on here, to be the power of positive thinking and tell you that the Mizzou Tigers are going to come away victorious here, but I just don't see it. And I don't see it mainly because of their opponent. You know what I'm saying? I don't know how many Army opt-outs there were, but I guarantee there wasn't too many of them. You know what I'm saying? You're going to get the full force of these guys when they come down here, and they're going to want to get 9 victories. So I think it's a close game. I think it's a low-scoring game. I think they're going to do everything they can to keep Missouri's offense off the field. But I'm just going to have to give Army the victory with the last possession here and the spread. I think the spread's 6.5 here, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so give me Army and the over 27, Mizzou 20.
Why do you hate Mizzou, Shane?
It's that concussion, man. You know, I don't think right sometimes.
I heard your brother say, Shane, I mean, you know, Missouri's got the opt-outs we mentioned. At the Army, they ain't got no opt-outs because you opt out, you're getting shipped overseas. So, hey, maybe he well said there by the Flying Hawaiian. And, you know, that's kind of what this game I think is going to come down to. Who wants to be there more? And with none of the captains playing, some of them due to injury, but others due to opt-out, it's like you said, it's going to be tough to see a path for Missouri to win this football game. It's going to be tough to see Missouri score points because with that triple option attack, Army eats up the clock. And, you know, how many possessions Missouri realistically going to get in this football game? And, yeah, we know, like you said, the run defense has improved. But, you know, you got only 2-3 weeks to prepare for this attack. I just don't know if you're going to make the strides necessary to be able to slow them down. So I'm kind of right there with you. Now, I hope I'm wrong. Maybe Brady Cook, who fans have been calling for much of the season, maybe he gets in there. Maybe he shines. Maybe even if he struggles, maybe we get Tyler Macon in there and he shines. So, you know, there's potential for maybe the offense was kind of getting held back by Connor Bazelak. We know he's been banged up, so I'm not putting it all on him, but maybe a little bit more on the injuries. But how can you go with Missouri when you've had Coach Drinkowitz here say, you know, this guy's the heart and soul of this team. How many wins, you know, what's his value? His value is every damn win we've had on the board. And if Tyler Beatty ain't playing, it's hard for me to see Missouri pulling ahead and winning the Armed Forces Bowl. So I'm right there with you. I actually even have it a little bit more lopsided than you, Shane, because I think it's going to be difficult for Missouri to put up points on the board. I got Army 24, Missouri 13.
Now, Mike, I said all that, and I'm going a little positive spin here. I will say there's going to be something nice about having that youth out there because I think there's no expectations here. I think there's no consequences of losing. The fact you made a bowl game, you know, you're getting an extension at some point. You keep doing that at Mizzou, you're going to be fine. But I think Eli's going to be coming in here with a clean slate, man. Just let's grip and rip, man. Let's have some fun. Let's let these young kids play a little bit. I think one of the big ones is the fact Beatty's out. And I know that sounds crazy, but, you know, sometimes Mizzou reminded me of Kentucky a few years back when they just wanted to get Benny Snell as many touches as possible, you know? Right. It gets, you know, I think sometimes they get in their way when you have just one player being so dominant. You want to force feed them the ball, and then you kind of, you know, bleed your offense through that. Now they don't have to do that. They can really cut loose. They could really have some fun here. And I think if you're looking spin zone here, the fact that Mizzou's going to come out with an offense that they've never seen. I mean, when's the last time you've not seen Beatty in uniform? You know what I'm saying? So who knows? Maybe we're looking at the end of this thing and saying, damn, what was I thinking having Mizzou lose to Army? But right now it is tough because of the opt-out situation. Your captains, of all people, not going to be there. And I don't blame them. You know, I mean, we're talking millions of dollars on the line here for a potential injury, but you'd still love to see them at full crew because I think if that was the case, we'd have a victory. But who knows, man? You may come away here with quarterback controversy. I mean, there's a lot of good things that could come from here. I mean, this is the Hoover storyline is going to be created, man.
Yeah, and one aspect of this game not to overlook, Shane, Steve Wilkes, the defensive coordinator, you know, in his first year there in Columbia, came from the NFL. It certainly looked like it was a struggle to adjust to the college game, but you know, he made that adjustment late in the season, maybe with a couple of weeks of further evaluation, a couple of weeks of understanding what his players can and cannot do. You know, maybe that defense takes a huge this is the great unknown of bowl season, Shane. You just don't know who is going to step up with these added practices. You don't know. You know, it could be the defense from Missouri, which we thought was going to be a strength of that team. They weren't for much of the season. Maybe they make those strides this year, and because across the board, Missouri is going to have a talent advantage over Army, and maybe that wins the day here in the Armed Forces Bowl.
Absolutely, man. It's an audition for some of these kids. Some of these kids that didn't get the
Right.
opportunities throughout the season, maybe they're better at game time under the lights than they are in practice. So who knows? We may have a couple studs pop here in a minute, and you'd be like, okay, they're going to be all right.
Well, hey, buddy, this podcast with the interviews went a little bit long, so I'm going to cut it right here. But, hey, it's just great to hear your voice. You know what? And I know the listeners appreciate it more than anybody. So I just want to say thanks again for joining the show, breaking down the start of SEC bowl games. We got one more on Thursday, and then we're going to have several next week. So, man, it's great to be picking bowl games here again, isn't it?
Absolutely, man. A lot of people reached out. A lot of people worried, Shane, that I haven't packed my bags here. You know, I took a little break here around the holidays. It's just really crazy at work. But it turns into a ghost town after January 1st. So I'll be more involved after the bowl games. But I appreciate you getting on here with me, Mike. I love talking gambling. Put all your money on Army. That means Mizzou's probably going to walk away the winner. So that's my lock.
All right, we'll catch you on the next one. Appreciate everybody for hanging out. I just said the same thing. We'll catch you on the next one.
All right. See you guys. Go Vols.